Collins had heard the introduction so many times she could deliver it herself. "Hi, this is our daughter Collins. She works at a grocery store," said with a specific smile, the kind that communicated affection on the surface and embarrassment underneath. The kind that invited the other person to nod politely and redirect the conversation towards something more interesting, like her sister's law degree, or her brother's position at a financial firm, or her parents' own carefully curated version of the family's professional story. Collins did work at a grocery store. That part was technically accurate. What the introduction left out was that she owned it. Not just the one her parents drove past on their way to the kinds of events where introductions mattered. She owned four of them: an independent grocery chain she had been building for 6 years across 2 counties, with 73 employees, a regional supplier network she had negotiated personally, and a reputation in the local food access space that had just earned her an invitation to speak at a regional business leadership gala. The same gala her parents were attending as guests of her brother's firm. Collins had known they would be there. She had said nothing. She had accepted the speaking invitation, confirmed her role as the event's featured entrepreneur, and had driven to the venue that evening in the specific quiet of someone who understood that the truth was about to introduce itself without any assistance. Her parents had introduced her to 3 people in the cocktail hour before the program began. All 3 times she works at a grocery store, then the MC took the stage. Before the MC reads that bio and says Collins's name into a microphone in front of 300 people, hit subscribe right now. Because the moment her mom's champagne glass stops midair is one of the most satisfying things in this entire story. New videos every single week. Hit like if you have ever been reduced to one sentence by people who never asked about the paragraph. Drop a comment. Have you ever let someone keep getting your story wrong because you knew the truth was going to show up eventually? Now let's go back to Asheville, because Collins just heard herself introduced as working at a grocery store for the 3rd time tonight, and the MC is walking to the stage. "My name is Collins. I am 31 years old and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I have been running a business for 6 years, a real one, with employees and leases and supplier contracts and quarterly financials that I reviewed every Monday morning with the specific focused attention of someone who understood that the numbers either confirmed the decisions or corrected them. Grove Market had 4 locations across 2 counties, 73 people on payroll, and a mission that had earned us recognition in spaces my parents had never thought to look. None of that was visible in the way my parents described me at events where descriptions mattered. At those events, I worked at a grocery store," said with a smile that communicated they found this charming in a minor way and were ready to move the conversation forward. The family dinner was in April, my brother Tyler's promotion at his financial firm, a celebration my parents had organized with the genuine pride they brought to Tyler's professional milestones. The venue was a restaurant they liked for occasions that required a certain presentation. There were 12 people at the table: family, Tyler's colleagues, a couple my parents had known for years. The conversation moved through Tyler's new role with the sustained enthusiasm of a table that had been assembled specifically to celebrate it. My sister's recent partnership at her law firm was mentioned and received warmly. When the conversation reached me, my mom introduced me to Tyler's colleague with the smile I knew and the words I knew. "This is our daughter Collins. She works at a grocery store." The colleague nodded pleasantly and turned back to Tyler. I drove home after the dinner through the Asheville streets I had been driving for 6 years and sat with a feeling I was still learning to name accurately. It was not humiliation. I had been introduced that way enough times that the introduction itself had lost its immediate sting. It was not anger exactly, though there was something adjacent to anger in it. It was closer to the specific tiredness of someone who had spent a long time waiting for a correction that was never going to come from the people who owed it, and had finally arrived at the understanding that the correction was going to have to come from somewhere else. I had been patient for 6 years. I had mentioned the company at family dinners. I had given the truth every reasonable opportunity to land on its own. It hadn't. Something was going to have to change about the approach. Grove Market had started as a single store in a neighborhood on the east side of Asheville that had not had a full-service grocery within walking distance for 11 years. A food desert in the specific technical sense. The kind of gap that affected the health outcomes and daily logistics of the families who lived there in ways that were well documented and consistently under-addressed. I had identified it at 25 through a combination of research and the specific observation of someone who had grown up in a nearby neighborhood and understood the landscape personally. I had opened the first location at 26 with a small business loan, a supplier relationship I had spent 4 months negotiating, and 70-hour weeks that had been the defining feature of my life for the first 2 years. By the time I sat at that April dinner, we had 4 locations, 73 employees, and a regional reputation in the food access space that had produced multiple speaking invitations and a feature in a publication my parents subscribed to. The invitation came in May, a formal email from the organizing committee of the Regional Business Leadership Gala, which was the most significant professional event in our two-county area, and which drew an attendance of 300 guests from the regional business, civic, and nonprofit communities. They were inviting me to serve as the evening's featured entrepreneur, the centerpiece speaking slot, reserved each year for a business owner whose work the committee considered representative of the event's core values. The invitation included a description of the segment and its prominence in the program. I read it twice. I accepted within 2 days with a note that said I was honored and would prepare remarks that reflected the work accurately. I did not mention it to my family. I had learned by then that mentioning things to my family before they happened produced a specific kind of response that I was no longer interested in managing. The gala's organizing committee had sent a preliminary attendee list to speakers as a standard courtesy, names and affiliations, useful for networking preparation. I read through it with the professional attention I brought to anything that might inform how I prepared. I found my brother Tyler's name on the third page, listed as attending with a +2 reservation through his firm's table. I looked at the +2 notation for a moment. Tyler's +2 at professional events was reliably my parents'. I checked the firm's table reservation and confirmed the guest names. My parents were attending the gala as Tyler's guests. They would be in a room of 300 people when the MC introduced the evening's featured entrepreneur and read the bio of the founder and owner of Grove Market. I saved the guest list to my desktop and went back to preparing my remarks. I drove to the gala venue on a Thursday evening in June, the remarks prepared, the outfit considered, the Grove Market credential confirmed in the speaker registration email I had printed and folded in my bag. I had not told Tyler I was speaking. I had not told my parents I was attending. I had not arranged anything or positioned anything or done any of the preparatory management I had sometimes done in the past when I was trying to control how information about my life landed in my family's hands. I had simply accepted the invitation, prepared the remarks, and was now driving to the venue. My parents would be there. The MC would read my bio into a microphone in front of 300 people. The introduction that had been following me for 6 years was going to be corrected tonight. Not by me, not through an argument or a carefully constructed conversation. By a fact stated clearly, in a room that included everyone. Collins had identified the food desert on the east side of Asheville through a combination of public health research and the specific knowledge of someone who had grown up nearby and understood the landscape personally rather than academically. The neighborhood had not had a full-service grocery within walking distance for 11 years. Residents were navigating a combination of convenience stores with limited fresh produce, a bus route that required a 40-minute round trip for basic groceries, and the particular compounding difficulty of food access limitations on households that were already managing tight margins. Collins had looked at the gap for 2 years before she acted on it. When she acted, she had a business plan, a location identified, and a supplier relationship she had spent 4 months building before she signed the lease. The first Grove Market location had opened on a small business loan from a regional lender who had reviewed Collins's plan and her financial projections and had approved the amount she needed within 6 weeks of her application. She had spent the preceding months developing a supplier partnership with a regional food distributor, a relationship she had approached through a cold contact, had built through 3 months of consistent follow-up, and had finalized through a negotiated terms agreement that gave Grove Market pricing competitive enough to make the community grocery model financially viable rather than perpetually marginal. The partnership had been the structural piece that made everything else sustainable. She had negotiated it herself across a conference table with 2 people who had initially assumed she was representing a larger organization. She had not been. Year 2 had produced the proof of concept she needed to believe the model was replicable. The first location had hit operational profitability in month 14, which was 4 months ahead of her original projection, and the community response had been consistent enough to suggest that the gap she had identified on the east side of Asheville existed in comparable form in neighboring communities. She had spent 6 months researching the second location before committing, same methodology, same community assessment, same supplier extension conversation with her regional distributor. The second location had opened in a neighboring county in year 3 with a smaller loan than the first because her existing operational track record had improved her lending terms. It had reached profitability in month 11. The model was working. In year 4, a regional food access nonprofit called the Western Carolina Community Table had published their annual report on food access conditions across the region, a document that was distributed to civic organizations, local government offices, regional media, and community stakeholders across 2 counties. Grove Market had been featured in the report as a case study in effective community grocery development. 2 pages, Collins's photograph, specific data on the number of households served, and the measurable improvement in fresh produce access in the neighborhoods where the stores operated. The report had been publicly available. It had been covered in a brief item in a regional publication. Collins's parents subscribed to the publication. She had not pointed the item out to them. It had apparently not been noticed. Year 5 had been the year the compounding became visible in a way that was difficult to attribute to luck or favorable timing. It was simply the result of 5 years of consistent decisions, accumulating into a position that was meaningfully different from where she had started. The third and fourth locations had opened 6 months apart, both in communities that had been identified through the same assessment methodology, both supported by the supplier network that had grown alongside the stores. 73 people were employed across the 4 locations, full-time and part-time, benefits offered to full-time staff, a management structure Collins had built deliberately rather than reactively. 2 previous speaking invitations had come from organizations in the regional food access and small business spaces. She had accepted both. Neither had been mentioned at a family dinner. 18 months before the gala, her parents had attended a community fundraiser for a neighborhood organization in Asheville's East Side, the kind of event they attended occasionally as part of the social and civic participation that structured their weekends. Grove Market had sponsored the catering for the event. The food had come from the East Side location's kitchen, the serving staff had been Grove Market employees, and the sponsor banner had been displayed at the entrance to the catering area for the duration of the evening. Collins had known her parents were attending. It had been mentioned at a family dinner the week before. She had said nothing about the sponsorship. Her parents had eaten the food, had presumably walked past the banner, and had not connected the Grove Market name to their daughter's company. She had found out through her catering manager's post-event report, which had noted the family connection without particular comment. She had tried. That was the part she came back to when she examined the 6 years honestly. She had tried, at 3 separate family dinners across those years, to tell them what she was building. The first time had been at year 2, when the second location was in planning. She had mentioned the expansion during a dinner conversation, and her mom had said that sounded like a lot of work, and her dad had asked Tyler about his upcoming work trip, and the table had moved on. The second time had been at year 4, after the nonprofit report. She had mentioned being featured in a report, and her mom had said that was nice and asked if she wanted more pasta. The third time had been at year 5, when 73 people were on her payroll. She had mentioned the employee count, and her dad had said she must be staying busy. The conversation had moved on in under 30 seconds. She had stopped trying after the third time. Collins arrived at the gala venue at 6 o'clock, the Asheville Grove Event Center, a converted warehouse space that had been operating as a premium event venue for 4 years, and that she had driven past enough times to know its exterior well without having been inside. She checked in at the speaker registration desk near the main entrance, gave her name, received her featured entrepreneur credential on a lanyard, was handed a program with her bio printed on the inside back cover, and her name listed prominently in the evening's schedule. The event coordinator walked her briefly through the evening's logistics pre-program speaker area, timing for the featured entrepreneur segment, where she would be seated during dinner. Collins thanked her, clipped the credential to her jacket, and walked into the venue. The cocktail hour was running when Collins moved from the speaker's pre-event area into the main reception space at 6:30. 300 guests in the early stages of the particular social energy that good events produced in their first hour. The room finding its rhythm, conversations forming and reforming, the catering staff moving through with trays. Collins accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and stood for a moment orienting herself to the room's layout. She found her parents within 40 seconds, her mom in a blue dress she recognized from a previous event, her dad beside her talking to a man Collins didn't know, Tyler nearby with the easy confidence he carried at professional gatherings. She noted their location and turned toward a group of people she recognized from a regional business organization. She spent the first 15 minutes of the cocktail hour in conversations that had nothing to do with her family. A brief exchange with the executive director of the Western Carolina Community Table, who had been instrumental in nominating her for the featured entrepreneur slot, and who greeted her with the genuine warmth of someone who had been following her work for 3 years. A conversation with two small business owners she knew from a regional entrepreneurship network, one running a manufacturing operation, one in sustainable agriculture, both people she had encountered at previous events and whose work she genuinely respected. She was present and engaged in each conversation with the natural ease of someone in a professional environment where her standing was understood. She was also aware, continuously and precisely, of where her parents were in the room. Her parents found her at 6:45, her mom spotting her first across the room with the specific pleased surprise of a parent encountering their child at an event they hadn't expected them to attend. Her mom crossed the room with Tyler just behind her dad following, all three of them carrying the warm, uncomplicated energy of people who were glad to see a family member at a nice event and had no particular reason to wonder why she was there. Her mom hugged her and said she hadn't known Collins was coming. Collins said she had been looking forward to it. Her dad said it was a good event, that Tyler's firm had reserved a table for years. Tyler gave her a brief hug and said, "Hey." Nobody asked what had brought her there. Nobody asked about her credential. The first introduction came within 2 minutes of her family finding her. A colleague of Tyler's named Brandon who worked at the same firm and whom her parents had apparently met at previous events. Her mom made the introduction with the practiced social ease she brought to all introductions, warm, fluid, the kind of social facilitation that her parents were genuinely skilled at. She said, "This is our daughter Collins. She works at a grocery store." Brandon nodded with the polite interest of someone receiving information they were not going to follow up on and extended his hand. Collins shook it and said it was nice to meet him. Brandon asked Tyler something about the firm's upcoming quarter. The conversation moved on in the direction it had always been going to move. Collins held her champagne glass and smiled and waited. Her mom encountered a woman she knew from a professional organization, a civic engagement group she had been part of for several years, and the introduction happened with the same natural momentum as the first. Her mom was good at this. Collins had always known that the social connection, the easy warmth, the way she moved through rooms like this one with the confidence of someone who had been attending them for 30 years and understood their particular grammar. She introduced Collins with the same words and the same smile. "This is our daughter Collins. She works at a grocery store." The woman said how nice, asked which one, seemed satisfied with the answer without requiring specifics. Collins said it was lovely to meet her. The woman turned back to her mom. Collins looked at the program in her hand and found her name in the schedule. The third introduction came at 7:10, 20 minutes before the program was scheduled to begin. Her dad had pulled her into a conversation with a man he described as an important contact in the regional development space, someone whose professional opinion her dad clearly valued and wanted to demonstrate his family connection to. He introduced Collins with his own version of the introduction, same information, slightly different phrasing, identical implication. "She works at a grocery store." The man nodded. Collins shook his hand and said something brief and appropriate. Then she excused herself politely, said she needed to check in with the event coordinator before the program began. Her dad said, of course. Her mom said she would see her at the table. Collins walked toward the front of the room where the speaker's area was. The MC was already at the side of the stage, program in hand, reviewing his notes. The program began at 7:30 with the particular shift in energy that happened when 300 people moved from the social looseness of a cocktail hour into the structured attention of a seated program. Collins was at the speaker's table near the front, positioned to the left of the stage, close enough that her walk to the podium would be brief when the time came. She had reviewed her remarks one final time in the speaker's area before the doors opened for seating, and had felt the specific settled readiness of someone who had prepared thoroughly and had nothing left to do but deliver. She found her water glass and her printed remarks at the place setting, marked with her name card. She sat down and looked at the room filling around her and felt completely calm. The MC opened the program with the practiced energy of someone who understood that the first 5 minutes of an event set the register for everything that followed, warm enough to relax the room. substantive enough to establish that the evening had real content, paced well enough to signal that the time would be respected. He acknowledged the sponsors, recognized the organizing committee, and gave a brief overview of the evening's structure that told the audience what was coming without diminishing it. He mentioned the featured entrepreneur segment by name, said it was the evening's centerpiece, that it represented the gala's core purpose, that this year's honoree was someone whose work had been reshaping the regional landscape in ways the committee considered essential to recognize publicly. Collins heard the description and kept her eyes on the program in her hands. Collins had been aware of her parents' table since the room filled. It was 4 rows behind the speaker's table and slightly to the right, which placed it in her peripheral vision without requiring her to appear to watch it. She had checked its position once when she sat down and had not looked directly at it since. She was aware of it the way she was aware of most things she had assessed and filed, continuously but without visible attention. Her parents were there. Tyler was there. The important contact her dad had introduced her to was apparently at the adjacent table, based on the brief exchange she had observed during seating. 300 people were in the room. Her credential was on her jacket. Her name was in the program. The evening was proceeding exactly as she had understood it would. The MC returned to the featured entrepreneur segment at 8:15, after the award presentations and the organizational updates that had filled the first portion of the program. He said the featured entrepreneur recognition was the moment of the evening he personally looked forward to most, that it existed to put a specific face and a specific story on the kind of work that regional business communities needed to see modeled and celebrated. He said this year's honoree had been selected unanimously by the committee. He said her work represented something the committee believed in at a fundamental level, the idea that identifying a gap in your community and building something real to address it was one of the most significant things a business owner could do. He said he wanted to read her bio before he said her name. He read it clearly and completely, the way bios were meant to be read at events like this one, without rush, giving each element its weight. Grove Market. Founded 6 years ago in response to a documented food access gap on the east side of Asheville. 4 locations across 2 counties, 73 employees, a regional supplier network built from scratch through direct negotiation. Featured in the Western Carolina Community Table's annual report as a case study in community grocery development. 2 previous speaking recognitions from regional food access and small business organizations. The MC paused after the last item, a brief natural pause, the kind that a practiced speaker inserted when they wanted what had just been said to finish landing before they continued. Then he said, the founder and owner of Grove Market. He said her full name clearly into a microphone in a room of 300 people. Not a nickname, not a shortened version. Her complete name, the one that appeared on her business registration documents, and her supplier contracts and her loan agreements, and the program that every person in that room was holding. Collins heard it from the speaker's table and stood, the natural movement of someone who had been expecting their name and was ready when it arrived. She heard the applause begin as she pushed her chair back. She picked up her printed remarks. She walked the distance from the speaker's table to the stage steps with the unhurried pace of someone who had been moving toward this particular moment for 6 years, without knowing its specific shape, until 5 weeks ago when an invitation had arrived in her inbox. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and crossed to the podium and adjusted the microphone to her height with the practical efficiency of someone focused on the task in front of her rather than the room around her. She set her printed remarks on the podium surface and looked out at 300 people, the organizing committee at the front tables, the regional business and civic community filling the middle section, the sponsor tables along the sides. She found the speaker's table where she had been sitting. She found, without pausing on it, the table 4 rows back and slightly to the right. She looked at the room as a whole and took one breath and began speaking. Her voice was steady. It had always been steady. That was one of the things 6 years of building something real had produced in her. Collins spoke for 12 minutes, prepared remarks that she had written and revised over 2 weeks with the specific intention of saying something true and useful rather than something impressive. She opened with the East Side neighborhood, the 11-year gap, the bus route, the families navigating fresh produce access on tight margins and limited time. She talked about the first location and what it had required, the loan, the supplier negotiation, the 70-hour weeks of the first 2 years. She talked about what the model had taught her about the relationship between business viability and community need, that they were not in tension with each other, that the most sustainable businesses she had encountered were the ones that had started with a real problem and had stayed close to it. She did not perform humility. She did not perform with confidence. She simply told the truth about 6 years of work in 12 minutes. She did not look at her parents' table during the 12 minutes. Not once, not as a deliberate act of avoidance, not as a statement, just as the natural result of a speaker who was focused on the room she was addressing rather than the specific section of it that carried personal weight. She had made this choice consciously in the days before the gala, had decided that the speech was about the work and the community and the 6 years of decisions that had produced Grove Market, and that introducing her parents' table into the visual field of her attention while she was delivering it would make the speech about something else. She had built something real. The speech was going to be about the real thing. Everything else was going to have to take care of itself. The applause when she finished was sustained and genuine, the specific quality of a professional audience that had just heard something it found both impressive and meaningful, and was responding to the combination rather than to the performance of either. She had experienced applause at the two previous speaking engagements she had accepted, and had understood both times that the response was to the work rather than to her personally, that Grove Market's impact in the communities it served was what the rooms were responding to, and that her job was simply to represent it accurately. She accepted the applause with a brief acknowledgement and stepped back from the podium. The MC returned to the stage. Collins walked back down the 3 steps and returned to her seat at the speaker's table. The networking segment that followed the program produced 3 specific conversations that she noted mentally as she moved through the room. The first was with a regional food systems investor who had been in the audience and who asked specific questions about Grove Market's supplier network and whether the model was being considered for further expansion. Second was with the director of a regional workforce development organization who wanted to discuss a potential partnership around employment pathways. Grove Market's hiring practices had been mentioned in the featured entrepreneur bio and had caught his attention. The third was a journalist from a regional business publication who asked for a brief interview for a feature on the gala's honorees. Collins gave each conversation the full attention it deserved and confirmed follow-up contact with all 3. Her parents found her during the networking, her mom first, moving through the post-program crowd with the particular expression Collins had been trying to accurately read for 6 years and was only now beginning to understand completely. It was not a simple expression. It carried several things simultaneously: surprise that had not yet resolved into the shape it was going to take, the specific recalibration of someone whose understanding of a situation had just been substantially revised in a public setting, and underneath both of those something that Collins recognized as the beginning of a question her mom had not yet found the language for. Her dad was a step behind her mom. He had his jacket over one arm. His champagne glass from the cocktail hour was gone. She noticed this without knowing exactly why she noticed it. Tyler was not with them. Her dad reached her and stood for a moment before speaking, the specific pause of a man assembling words carefully rather than reaching for the ones that came first. He said the remarks had been impressive. He said he hadn't known the scope of what she had built. He said Grove Market, used the name, the actual name, for the first time she could remember hearing it from him, was clearly something significant. He said he wished he had known more about it. Collins looked at her dad with the steady attention she had been giving him her entire adult life and received what he said without rushing to make it easier or harder than it was. She said she appreciated him saying so. She said the company had been available to know about for 6 years. She said it simply and without sharpness. It was just true. Collins left the gala at 10:15, after the networking had wound down, after the follow-up contact information had been exchanged, after a final brief conversation with the event coordinator, who said the committee had been very pleased with the evening. She walked to her car in the venue parking lot with the featured entrepreneur credentials still on her jacket and the printed remarks folded in her bag. She drove home through the Asheville streets she had been driving for 6 years, past the East Side neighborhood, where the first Grove Market had opened, past the building where she had signed the first lease, through the city that had been the context for every decision that had produced the evening she had just had. She drove home in the specific quiet of someone who had waited a long time for an accurate introduction and had finally received one, not from her parents, not through an argument or a carefully managed conversation, but from a fact stated clearly into a microphone in a room of 300 people. The introduction had finally caught up with the truth. It had taken 6 years. It had arrived exactly on time.